I'm very happy to be able to talk to you. I started out researching Planet X and
Hmm.
Nibiru and all that when I had a spiritual experience that brought me to this research. I woke up one night. I heard like angels singing in my ears, like, and I rose out of bed. I was wide awake. I sat straight up, and I heard a man's voice, and it felt like it was a familiar family member, like in the room. And when he spoke to me, it was like, a family member was speaking to me, very comfortable. And I heard, "I'm coming." And as
Hmm.
soon as he said, "I'm coming," I felt a very intense euphoria down my head, down my spine. And it you would think that would really just sort of freak people out, but it was such a calm, comfort. It was such a. I can't even describe it. People think I'm crazy, but after that, I went to bed, and I don't know if it was that night or the night after. I had a dream of two sons, and that's basically what tipped me off to this whole thing. And of course, you open up one thing, and it just sort of branches off into everything. So that's how I got into this research. And essentially, what happened to me was I got into this YouTube community that was analyzing lens flares. I know you're familiar with like all the lens flares.
Yes, I've seen
And
enough to last a very long time.
so, I got involved in it, and I really deep down like I thought it was real. And I had a lot of anxiety, and I felt frozen in fear, and I was just trying to figure out what was going on. And I analyzed webcams to Mexico. There was people on YouTube saying there was like things you could track on, these webcams. You could track orbits of things, and I tried doing that myself. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized, I unveiled things like atmospheric phenomena, camera optics, physics of light. I
Mm.
started seeing things, and I got to the point where I got a telescope. I got an SLR. I started really digging. I dug really deep. I got Starry Night Pro. I really put the effort into trying to educate myself, and
Yeah.
I tried to learn about all these people involved in the Planet X community. So, you are one of the people I've come across, and you're the only person right now that I can say has sort of respected amateur astronomers, because through all this process, um, it seems to me like people, if it seems to me the Planet X community is not very respectful towards amateur astronomers. And if you
Hmm.
present things like things are lens flares, or things are
Now,
atmos
people tend to not gravitate when people say that they're wrong.
yeah,
You know,
and
when they show lens flares and these type of things, because the objects are real that they're seeing, but they're missing mirages. Okay, they are a real missing mirage, but they're not a real hard object. You know, there are illusions. You know
mhm.
that, and and people have a hard time grasping that they're seeing things. You see illusions that are atmosphere missing anomalies, but
Like,
that's part of things that if you ever looked at the sky enough, you would see them. You know,
and
but
then the sun halos and that stuff, people are
oh
calling
yeah,
them
there's a bunch of things.
planets. I mean, sundogs as planets and all that. And,
And conch trail when the sun is down, the sun is still lighting up the conch trail in a nice bright orangey glow, and it looks like a comet coming in, but it doesn't move like a comet, and so people don't know what it is, and they call it Planet X. It's not, you know. So
yeah.
there's numerous things, but there's no sightings in the public realm that are valid at the moment.
And it occurred to me a lot of these channels didn't really have the intention to, do anything
So
other than more like, for their own good, for their own like gain. It seemed to me like the truth didn't matter. It was more monetary and,
that's exactly what they're doing. That's exactly what they're doing. Yes, because they're For every hit that they get a revenue stream. I don't have that on my channel. Only ones that I may have one or two video if I borrowed a song from somebody, and then they'll put a lock or like a copyright because of a song, and then they'll add a a advertisement to it so they can collect royalties. They don't penalize me for using their song, but they use my video because the song is on it to get royalties off of it.
Gotcha. Yeah, and
And so that's the only time you see something that I have that has royalties on it. I ain't collecting it.
I basically went from being this like girl who was looking at lens flares and talking about it on YouTube to just trying to educate people on just the basics. I'm a very novice telescope user. I can't even call myself an amateur because I feel like that title's very deceiving because what real amateur astronomers do knowledge-wise when it comes to astrophysics and stuff, what I've seen has blown my mind.
Well, amateur astronomers, there's different levels of them. It goes, but that's what the term means. From the beginning, I know amateur astronomers that spent millions of dollars on equipment, and they are equivalent or even better than some of the professional astronomers, but they're not paid. A professional astronomer makes a living at it and gets paid by a university, which is paid by the government, you know, basically, or something, or they work straight for the government. But when they find something, anytime they take a government check, okay, or grant, it says in there, in the clauses, if they, you know, you can't do anything to alarm the public. You can't make a statement.
Yeah.
So the only way that this is going to come out is through amateurs who have not signed those type of papers. And that's why they're going to have to silence the internet when it comes close enough, when they uncloak it and allows us to see it. You know, you can look up cloaking in Wikipedia, whatever, it'll show you how it's done. It's not that hard anymore, especially since they have space-based lasers. When Reagan put them up there for that particular purpose, one of the purposes. Uh, uh, Space-based lasers have multiple purposes. It can be a missile defense system. It can produce a hologram in the sky. It can cloak an object coming in or out, and then it can heat up the atmosphere if they needed to change weather, or they can be a destructive weapon by zapping an entire building out of its existence, or even a human being. Vaporize them.
Yeah, I've researched space weapons, and it's a bit frightening what they can do.
Well, yeah, I mean they are 30 years ahead of us. What the most advanced stuff that we see with our own eyes, the secret departments are 30 years ahead of us. You know, it's way out there. It's very next to Star Trek.
I believe it. There's a lot of unknowns, and I try to tread just sort of in I call it the gray area. You know, you get the hardcore believers that, you know, think it's here right now, and then you have, you know, a lot of professionals that say no way, no how. And I try to see both sides. And the thing about you that stuck out to me was your respect for amateur astronomers. So I definitely wanted to talk. What is your background in how did you get into it originally?
I was forced into it because of the data. I had no love per se to get into a very expensive hobby.
It is expensive.
And but I was forced to prove out the data because the data tells me without a doubt, after 3.5 years of trying to disprove the findings, and the evidence kept piling up that it is there, instead of finding the Achilles heel that would kill it. And I no longer had any grounds to stand on as far as being a skeptic. So that in turn caused me to take the next step, was to purchase a telescope, and once I realized you couldn't see it in a way with a telescope, then I had to ask myself, what's the reason, and what would I do if I was in the shoes of the government, or what would they do if they have a deceitful motive, let's say. Personally, I would just have told people during the time of Reagan, just like Russia's doing basically, or Germany. First, you start to tell them store up, 5 or 10 days of food. Then you come back, the following year it says store up a year of food or something like that, or 6 months, and you keep increasing it. Where slowly the public is prepared without knowing it, without setting off major alarms. But they didn't do that. They're preparing these underground facilities for only the elite, and the general public is out on a limb for it, paid by their pocketbook, but they're not invited to this party underground. And personally, I wouldn't join them.
No, I mean, there's definitely a total lack of transparency when it comes to the government and what they're doing and all that. So just so I have an understanding, like how you got into this, how you came about, like trying to figure all this out and coming up with this conclusion.
Like I said, I was a skeptic. Most of the internet jargon and everything pertaining to Planet X has every variety and flavor out there of this object, from a mini solar system to a planet to a sun to a solar system, you name it. There's nothing consistent on the type of orbit, the period of time, the size, the type of body that it is. There was nothing consistent, and neither did they have any hard facts to back it up. And so I was looking for, okay, who can prove this? And no one was able to prove it because they didn't have any facts to back it up. Now, what caught my attention was it seemed like Earth is going through multiple catastrophes. And it's possible that a solar intruder could have been the possible culprit, but where is the evidence? Is again pointed to it. So I couldn't find any as far as what people were presenting. And so I said, well, I'll take a look for myself. This is the last thing I'm going to do. I'm going to check the Chinese records because their records go back about 4,000 to 5,000 years. And the first paper I came across was the reevaluation of Eastern and Western records of the supernova 1054. Now, normally this would not have caught my attention. But I spent 10 months in China prior to that, and I got enamored with their culture and how far back it went, their architecture, their metalworking skills, everything. It's quite interesting on how advanced they were. Mm-hmm. And I knew about their astronomy, so I picked up this paper and started reading it. And come to find out that Western societies had an illusion that in 1054, this object that they saw was a supernova. But actually, the supernova was about 2 or 3 months earlier, documented in the Chinese records. This object that's been mislabeled, when they went back and reevaluated the text again, showed that it moved through multiple constellations. Well, supernova doesn't move, it's stationary.
Yeah.
Now, this was observed for a total of 26 months, 13 months coming in, 13 months coming out. If you know anything about reflecting light on a planet of some type or object, that's many times greater than what a comet would show us. It can only be a very large body that the albedo would be reflecting light at that normal level, let's say, for 13 months out. So it caught my interest. Then I did a few hand calculations, see where it was in the sky, because the this is not just the Chinese, but the Asian astronomers. It was China, Korea, and Japan astronomers. Mm-hmm. And I happened to know where their observatories were, so I knew the location. And so I positioned the software in those areas, as they were saying, on those dates, those times. They even gave us the angle when they saw it and such and everything, which is more information than most European uh, documents would give us pertaining to this object.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was enough information I thought that we could plot it. And so when I did a few hand calculations, it gave me an interesting bearing that it was on the ecliptic or very near the ecliptic. And I said, well, this would be a possible potential because for Earth to have a meteor shower, the object has to cross the ecliptic of Earth, Earth's planetary plane. So that's when I purchased astronomy software, built a model in it, and overlaid these points that it gave it. And that's when I was really shocked that this object crossed Earth's planetary plane twice, not just once. And that's a very unusual object. And according to their appearance, it had to be a very large object.
I think your audio broke up.
3.5 years for trying to disprove it.
Can you hear me okay? I think I had a little bit of an audio glitch.
Yes.
You can hear me.
I
Okay,
can hear
so
you.
when you say, I want to take my telescope to the sky, this right now you're saying is not naked eye visible. And
it's not even visible with the telescope because if they're cloaking it, you're able to redirect light, that's how we see an object. It's light which is reflecting off of it. It doesn't emit light. It's light which is reflecting. And if you have the ability to redirect the light, then the object is cloaked. Okay, so that is what cloaking is, and that's why we can't see it even with a telescope or with the naked eye. But visual is not the only means of telling whether or not an object is there. We rely too heavily on it because that's what we rely in our day-to-day work is our vision.
mm-hmm.
But just like a blind person is able to navigate without sight, okay, you can tune yourself to other points. Well, to verify this, is there such an object and is it being cloaked? Well, that meant you have to put aside sight and see if all of the other factors are there. And they are. If we see perturbation of planets, comets, moons, if we see unusual solar flare activity, if we see unusual movement in our magnetic field of the Earth, if we see severe pattern changes in weather, seasonal changes as well, do we see massive amounts of volcanic activity and earthquake activity? Do we see massive amounts of methane being released where it kills birds and fish? All of these answers are yes. And there's only one common denominator for this. And that's an inbound planet. All the other factors are there except sight. We don't rule it out. We be attentive and we look and we be patient until it does appear.
When you talk about perturbations with comets and stuff, because this is something I'm interested just getting into astronomy and trying to gain a better understanding of it. And that's what I've sort of concluded is like the first thing that we're going to see when this thing is, coming in is perturbations. So you said there are perturbations now? Like, could you just be more specific so I have that understanding? Because I'm a total noob and I'm just trying to figure stuff out.
Okay, first, let's get a better understanding on what's causing the perturbation. It's not gravity. The astronomy community tends to lean heavily on a gravity-ruled universe. But with recent findings on visual experiments that nature has provided in the solar system, proves out what the physicists have been claiming, that the tail of a comet is plasma, and that we have an electromagnetic universe, not gravity ruled. Gravity is the weaker force, and magnetic is the greater force. Well, that kind of changes a few things on how we perceive the universe. So think of you ever seen, let's see how we can do this. You ever seen where you have these 5 balls on strings and you can lift one
Oh,
up and it
yeah. Yep.
bangs the other one?
Yep.
Well, let's say those balls were, instead of stainless steel, they were steel. And you had a magnet to the side of that and you altered the path of one of those. It would disrupt the flow of energy going from one end to the other. Okay, you would noticeably be seeing a difference. Wouldn't that be correct?
So if the balls weren't steel, they were magnets essentially, and you rotated the pole of one of the magnetized balls.
No, no, it's not that complicated. If the balls were steel, and you brought in a magnet and passed it close to like it was just passing by it, it would alter the position of these balls in movement. You
Yes.
see?
Yes.
All right. Well, that's what's happening with comets and asteroids right now, and moons. They're not in their normal pathway. The
What
pathway is altered.
what ones? I mean, because I would sort of like to follow this. I haven't heard that. What specific, like when you say moons like that are being perturbed? What moons are you talking about? Are you talking about moons of other planets further out?
No, it's in our solar system. Our own moon. I have a study on our own moon being altered. I have also a study showing that there's one of the moons of Jupiter is altered. It's pulled to the side from the viewpoint of Earth. Okay. Um, you said you have a telescope, correct?
I do.
Well, if you bought a certain eye eyepiece, it has a crosshair like a scope.
Okay.
Okay, it centers it. Okay.
Yep.
Well, if your telescope has a computer on it, then what you do is whenever you set it up, you look for the North Star. You give 3 different positions, 3 or 4 positions whenever you're setting up your
With the
telescope.
alignment. Yeah.
Right. And then once you hit, let's say, go to Jupiter, well, those crosshairs should be right on the center of the planet. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So then once you had it verification that the center of the planet is there, and other, you do other ones, and when you come back to this, and you want to go to the moon of Jupiter, and it's not in the position that it needs, it's to the right or to the left. It says that tells you, and then you do some double checking to make sure other planets on other moons, are showing up correct. When you come back to that again and it's still off, then that tells you have a perturbation, that it's not in the position that it needs to be in this time and space. That gravity, like astronomers would say, but actually the physicists would say it's electromagnetic, and I tend to agree totally that it's electromagnetic pull that's altered the course of it.
Yeah, I have a Celestron Nexstar 6XE, and it's all, it's on a motor, and it takes a lot for me to calibrate it. And I think I still have a lot of learning to do when it comes to calibrating my telescope to get it to, get to the exact points, to slew over exactly where I want it to be.
You have to have the eyepiece with the crosshairs, and that's how
I have a star finder attached to the actual scope.
you put the eyepiece on your telescope whenever you find the North Star and the other points of reference. You make sure your scope, that crosshair, is on the center of those objects before you track over to the position you want to check. So once you have this verified, and you always come from the same direction, if it's clockwise or counter, whatever it is, you come from the same direction on all of these points, because that takes up the slack in the gearing. Unless you have heavy weights on the telescope, then you may have a little bit of a problem. But if you have a normally weighted telescope that's properly balanced,
Yeah, it's amazing what goes into just fine tuning everything so it slews over to things properly. That's sort of where I'm trying to practice and get good at, is just the initial setup of the telescope, because I have to drag my telescope in and out, and I don't have the luxury of having like a observatory or just even a stationary spot to keep my stuff.
Neither do I. I have a 9 1/4 uh, Celestron. That's the largest that I can move around in a Pelican case and travel with, and so I bring it to different parts of the country, towing it with me at certain times so I can set it up.
That's a big telescope to be lugging around. I wanted to go with a bigger telescope, but then I sort of was researching it, and
There was no need.
it
Yeah.
dawned on me I didn't need to go above a 6 inch for what I wanted to use it for, and if I went any larger, I would just be hating myself for lugging this stuff around, like, because it's a chore lugging all this stuff out. Like, I have cameras and SLRs and tripods.
Right.
And then you got your computer stuff, your power supplies. It's a chore, like,
Yep.
setting up. I think it's very, people underestimate the amount of effort that's involved with setting up a telescope and just getting it going. It's very
Sure.
deceiving. So
Some professional astronomers have criticized my equipment because they say it doesn't have the precision to see outside our solar system, and they make a bunch of assumptions that I'm looking beyond our solar system, and I'm not. I bought the equipment that I need for inside the solar system because my calcs tell me that it's within our solar system. Remember, if it would have reached, let's say, Neptune, according to Kepler's laws of planetary motion, it would take 16 years to reach our sun. Okay, we've been feeling the tugs of this object for over 25 years.
I definitely
Okay,
feel like there's some
so
kind of
it's
shift
definitely close.
energetically. Like, I feel like everyone seems to me to have like a general sense of like doom. You know, like everyone, there's not everyone, but a lot of people seem to have like a general air of just.
Well, I can tell you the reason why. Because the government is making huge underground preparedness of stocking food, underground facilities globally. All of these major governments are doing this. Okay, it's not because that they're afraid of a solar flare or anything like that. No, they're doing this because of meteor showers, and they don't know what size they're going to be in, and then on what side of the Earth it's going to be hit. And and if they don't get their science right, they're going to predict the wrong half of the Earth being hit too. And so the public is in tune when they see the government doing certain things, and they're used to the government lying to them, so they know something's up.
They do.
Okay.
And there's all kinds of talk about war, and one of the things I was sort of reflecting on is this, like, with all the talk of war, is this the rumors of war, or is this going to be the actual war?
Rumors.
Yeah. So
there is going to be smaller wars in the Middle East, which will cause oil to go up maybe $200 to $300 a barrel, but that's part of their intentions to stop people from traveling. They're going to oil is going to be rationed because of rarity, and the price is going to be high even if you could get it. So there's three things they have to do to control people: ration money, ration food, and ration fuel. And the way you're going to ration fuel is have a war in the Middle East. So this is if you know how to play chess, and you know the pieces of the global economy on what it takes to control the masses, you can see what they're going to do ahead of time. The way they're positioning their soldiers, their attitude, their temperaments, their speeches, their threats, tells you this. This is no more than a giant chess game, and we will know how close this object is by the reaction of the government.
Now, I remember listening to something a while back about Hezekiah and the winged disc. Could you like explain that a bit to me? Because I'm still researching and trying to, get my facts together and have a better understanding of, you know, what that's about and how it relates to.
Remember, they had the only they didn't have much. They had parchments, sometime at one point, but most of that was carved on clay tablets or carved on rock. So your drawings had to be more simplistic. Okay, so how would you, since you don't have a word for planet, it doesn't exist in the vocabulary yet. Okay, so what they have is illuminated body
Mm-hmm.
throughout most of the thousands and thousands of years. So this illuminated body passed the earth, and how would they show it? They would show a disk with wings, showing that it was in the sky, traveling across the sky. The wings showed that it was traveling like a bird across it. And archaeologists sometimes will go through this and say, oh, this is a god. No, that's a misinterpretation. They did worship this thing at certain points, but they were also representing a real object, not to be mixed up as a fictitious object that is a god. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, and it was called a mighty one in the ancient language, just like kings, and many other entities. But it's when you look at it, you can tell at what periods of time often that it had passed, if you know how to read ancient languages. But uh, you can't really, you shouldn't use modern words unless you're absolutely sure that that's what it was. Otherwise, it's better just to interpret with similar words and let the reader make his own interpretation. And this was uh, not just the Egyptians drew it with a winged disc, but I think ancient Sumerians at one point did also. Many cultures did. Um, the Mayans showed a serpent with wings.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, the Asians called this a serpent because it had a tail similar like a comet.
Mm-hmm.
And everything, and you can see it on almost all of their metal working and wood carvings. It was throughout the Asian culture of a dragon in the sky, and you can actually see plasma or lightning bolts off of these objects. They were showing these were their newspaper of that period of time, trying to convey a message to the people that it happened during this time frame and that time, But today the message is lost. Um, uh, so once we go back, without tracking this back through history, in the Chinese records, which happened only 960 years ago in 1054, tracking it back, we're able to see when it occurred. And that's when it brought me to the Bible. In ancient cultures, there's over 14 cases in the Bible where they've seen it. Anytime you hear of a double eclipse, well, a double eclipse doesn't come in the natural. It takes a third object to make a double eclipse. When you read about 7-year droughts, that's not an average drought. This is an object that's causing these things. Or when it says the whole earth was shaken. Well, an earthquake doesn't shake the entire earth. Another one is when fiery hail was mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when fiery hail, that's a meteor shower, and you have to go through a tail of debris, usually. Otherwise, it's one meteor. But they say a hail of meteors, fiery hail. That's a different circumstance than
I
just one meteor, you see?
I struggle with all the different interpretations myself. Like digging into this initially, I got into studying like the eschatology of everything, and it was like, wow, this is deep. Like there's so much to it, data wise, to try to track down and figure out and piece together something of a rational thought, you know? How did you like? So you got into the Bible. Like, there's like a gazillion different like versions of the Bible. Have you been using multiple like different ones? Have you delved into like the Dead Sea Scrolls for matching up things, or what have you used?
Yes, I started off with the King James Bible, and because I was told all of my life that it was accurate and to the T, and that was the one that sworn to be correct. Well, come to find out, and I was hesitant on changing, but I found too many errors in it. And the way that I checked this, because remember, if you're copying, let's say, to give you an example, let's say 3,000 years ago, they had a vision of a car, and they told you the parts, the engine, the drivetrain, the tires, and everything, and the gas. And as it took from that old language and was translated throughout the 1,000 years before it got to you now, and you knew that they were talking about a car, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
But now they said, the tires are spheres instead of, tires or something like that, or that it's a 5-story vehicle or something like that, that it throws it all off, that it doesn't meet the present science. But then you go back in older documents, and the older documents are correct, but the modern documents are not. So you have a problem with translation.
That's one of the problems, and I'm not going to get into this too much because I know that like Marshall Masters, and like I've seen some things of him going off on you on YouTube, so I'm not even going to get into it. But I mean, my problem with Sitchin is it seems to me like, because Marshall's like all big on him, so this is just like an outsider trying to piece stuff together. That's all I am, like. And it seems to like Sitchin stuff, like he studied these Sumerian texts, but it's no different than like you or I looking at these Sumerian texts with no real like good knowledge of the Sumerian texts and sort of making our own interpretation about it. So I find it like it's all up to interpretation at that point, and you can't say anything solid or factual.
There's an old saying that's pretty wise, and it goes like this. He says, "Do not correct a fool, or he will hate you. Correct a wise man, and he will appreciate you." So I don't answer Marshall Masters on his claims, okay? He is stuck in his rut, and there's no way he's going to get out. Okay, so to get back to your question, though, the Dead Sea Scrolls were pieced together using what's called the Leningrad Codex. All right,
Mm-hmm.
that's the oldest intact Torah or Tanakh that we have. It's about 1,000 years old. That's has the entire Old Testament. You can get PDF copies of this and everything. And that's what they use to piece together, because that's what they found matches the text. It's not modern Hebrew text or modern King James text that's matching.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to that ancient Leningrad Torah, and when I was reading out of that, the stories were correctly stated that matched the model that we could reproduce in the laboratory on every case, not just one case, on all 14 cases.
Wow.
So when they didn't have, remember, we just really grasped onto this in the last 15 years that the universe is a plasma universe, and not everyone, still the biggest camp in astronomy still holds on to the theory of gravity. Well, that theory has never been proven. The plasma model is being proven by nature. Well, when we take these models, and it's this is what astrophysics calls science pertaining to astronomy. If you can take observed phenomena, show that it's repeatable in a laboratory, that is science. Well, this is what we did with the 14 cases in the Bible. This same Chinese model we took, or Asian model, we took that overlay on the entry and exit and its separation of the amount of days between them. and we overlaid it to the using the plasma model, it gives us all of these accounts to the T. Like for Joseph of Egypt, when the skies bowed to him,
Mm-hmm.
when the two planets get close enough, they tilt towards each other. You have a 26 to 28 degree tilt, which is proven in an artifact in Germany of the same time period of Joseph of Egypt, which called the Nibiru disk.
I've read about that, and I've wondered about that as well, like its relevance with all this.
Right, they have some errors in the official description of that Nibiru disk that are caught. One, they never caught that the moon is facing the wrong direction. The illuminated side has to be facing the sun. Two, they never stated that it had to be an eclipse from some other object, because you can only have a new moon to eclipse the sun. The moon is shown in a crescent shape. That's not the proper shape to have a solar eclipse. And three, they never caught that, you see, Orion cannot be viewed from Germany in the month of April, unless you have a 26, 28 degree tilt. And this for the same time period. Remember, Joseph had a dream at 17 that the skies bowed to him. He didn't see that until he was 40. During the mid of the drought, the 7-year drought, was when this thing passed by in the mid of it. You have 3.5-year drought coming in, 3.5-year droughts as it leaving on certain areas of the globe. And when it passed by, like two magnets, they tilted, and he saw the skies bow to him, literally. So his dream of 17 came true when he was 40. And then we have this multiple times. Just like Yeshua when he was sacrificed on the cross. There's a double eclipse there. Can't have a double eclipse in the natural. And you can't have a 3-hour eclipse in the natural. It takes, remember, this is Passover. This is a full moon. It takes a new moon to make a solar eclipse, and the moon can only give you 7.3 to 7.5 minutes of darkness. Mm-hmm. So what gave us 3 hours of darkness, and that shook the entire earth, it says. Not just in the Bible, but outside texts.
Some people I've read thinks that it's like, like a volcano. Like
no,
the
it
ashes.
Doesn't even come close.
I've read that from somewhere. I don't know where. That's why it's so confusing to me. There's so much stuff out there, and I'm trying to make sense of, and just get input from everyone. Like, what is going on?
If you look at it as a whole, there's outside text that states the whole earth was darkened. You can't get that from a lunar, you can't get that from a volcano even. Neither one of them can give you a double eclipse. Keep in mind, it's a double eclipse. And the whole earth is shaken. Those two factors alone says it's an outside body. Mm-hmm. And it lands in the same time period on the spacing. You can clearly see these things in history when you look for it. If you look at this without prejudice. Remember, I was looking at this to disprove it, not to prove it.
And that's why I try to, it's a delicate line from the debunkers to the believers. And it's like something I struggle with, just trying to see, stay zoomed out and try to understand it as much as I can, because there's not a lot of people that can tread in the middle and sort of see both sides and, try to really seek out information. And I want to get people interested to help search the skies. There has to be a way with these amateur astronomers to be able to search the skies. Even with cloaking technologies, there has to be some kind of perturbation or something that we can see.
Only when the planets are perpendicular to the object, and that has already passed. If you look up at what, you may have another planet, but I doubt it. There was a planet that showed perturbation on Jupiter. Mm-hmm. Okay, most of the other planets on the opposite side of Earth. That's why we won't see many perturbations. They're too far away. If there's minor, and it would take a larger telescope to zoom in much closer to see if there's any difference in the position.
So basically, right now, if it is near, it's most likely cloaked, in your opinion, and then like
without a doubt.
if it's not, like here, you said there's a different date, like in the, like, was it 2020, 2025 or 2021? Which, I think it was 21.
I gave an estimate from 2012 to 2021 or greater. You know, the further it gets out, the lesser chance. The higher probability was from 2012 to 2016. But reading the text a little bit carefully, there's only one particular book and one entity that can give us future uh, dates. The book of Revelation gives us future dates if we interpret it correct. Now, I do not have a crystal ball. I cannot say tell the future. All I'm pointing out is that they're describing a event when you look at it through astronomy eyes. It says the moon at the foot of a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you're looking at the moon, where are you looking at? The skies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the woman would be Virgo.
Yeah.
Then it says she has to have a crown of 12 stars. Well, there's two ways of looking at it in ancient texts. It could be if there was another planet, which is a wandering star, that's what it was called during that period, or illuminated body. Stars were called illuminated body as well. You could have a planet moved in there, Mars, Jupiter, any, okay, which may have given Leo a total of 12. But that's not the only way that we can look at 12. 12 was also known as a crown, was what we call today the 12 signs of the zodiac. The Hebrew called it the 12 signs of the Mezarah. And there is a 180-degree difference between the zodiac and the Mezarah. Mezarah is viewed from the nighttime sky. The zodiac is viewed from the daylight skies. And you can't visualize stars and constellations in the daytime. You have to use charts.
Yeah.
So that's not the way the Almighty talks to us. He talks to us in the nighttime sky. That's why some people were choosing September using the occult version of the zodiac version, and they have no clue that that is the occult. That is not the pattern that the Almighty uses in the Bible. They use it in the nighttime sky and he uses the Mezarah. Okay, there is differences, and they're not to be. They're basically as different as the Antichrist versus the Messiah. They're
Yeah,
opposite
which
ends
shocks
of the
me
pole.
because there's so many people staring at the sun now looking for this.
Right, because they don't know enough astronomy or enough of the biblical Hebrew version of this. Remember, the scriptures are Hebrew texts. They're Middle Eastern Hebrew texts. Like if think of this for a moment. 100 years from now, some Chinese archaeologists come over here and they dig up a USB or a CD or something. And on there it says, on Turkey Day, let me see, it rained cats and dogs. Now, if they're not from America, which is called, this is called an American um, uh, ism or saying, okay?
Yeah.
In in the Bible, there's things called Hebrewisms, which are similar to that. It's only in the Hebrew culture can you understand what it's meaning.
Yeah.
Okay, so Chinese would pick this up, and you know what they would say? Probably on Turkey Day. Okay, this would probably be a God day for them, and it rained cats. That means they sacrifice cats and dogs on that Turkey God day. Okay, you see this throughout archaeology all the time. Them saying this is a god and this is what they were doing on this day. Look at your archaeology and take a look at this clearly. You see them saying this all the time. When they're misinterpreting cultural differences, they're applying their own culture to somebody else's culture. Can't do it. You got to get in the minds of these people to understand what they're saying. So, uh, so having a clear understanding of the ancient languages helps. And also, if you never spoke a European language, you're going to have difficulty understanding Hebrew because it's phrased in the same manner. Like in English, we have to substitute the position of your adjectives and your nouns, okay, for your structure of your sentence. Well, unless you know a European language, that's how Hebrew is written also. So it's difficult for a person who only knows English to try to understand what the Hebrews are talking about. I was raised in a multicultural language home, you know, and I had to learn to go back and forth to different cultures, and traveling helped me also in that. So
No, that's good because I mean I deal with that a lot just doing my research, seeing people just basically saying they have facts based on pure speculation. It's troubling to me. And one thing I appreciate about your work is you don't really. It's not like a matter of fact. It's like it's workable. It's like a malleable, thing that you're doing. It's you look at it, you give your best opinion, but you're not like writing it in stone as a matter of fact. You're just giving people data to do their own research and sort of go off of. And that's sort of where I've gotten my understanding of you. So that's why I have I trust you more than a lot of other things out there, because there's a lot out there and it's confusing and it's hard to discern, things.
One of the points that it brings me out to say this is that they were consistent in their stories of the same object with similar events. How can they consistently get the science correct if they didn't even know the science existed?
Exactly.
You can't do this by accident. And the timing shows you God's favor on the Hebrews at the time, because there's no other way of explaining it. And keep in mind, and only God or Yahweh can see into the future. And we have a book of Revelation that the Father gave what was to be said to Yeshua. Yeshua gave it to John to write it down. Again, Revelation, I can't disprove the science in it. The sequence, if you understand how to read it, because the way that he does it, he gives you he states you the beginning and the end, then he tells you what happens in the middle of it. So you got two events 150 days apart. CO 6 and 7 are two meteor showers. They're 5 months apart. And then he describes after that what happens in between the two events. And because there was no breaks, no chapters in the ancient texts, you have to understand what he's talking about and understand when it breaks, because the people who made the chapters and the verses and the paragraphs assumed that there was changes. Most of the changes were correct, but they may have the chapter break wrong. Where it switches gears.
Yeah, it's definitely tricky to follow. When you're trying to connect the dots and make sense of it. There's so many things that throw a wrench into calculations, and it's.
Yeah.
I just try to keep an open mind and look at it. I just try to be open minded. And not try to do any judgment on it. But, I'm a Christian, and I just know there's no fear, as long as I, repent and keep my faith, and, I'm a believer. So I don't have any fear, but it's just I'm working through this because I feel like there are some people that are, like, very, very much so in fear, like frozen with fear in regards to all of this.
I would suggest you study a little bit of the Hebrew, and you don't have to understand all of the words of the Hebrew. You just need to know the main emphasis of key words, okay? Because they got the adjoining words pretty well correct. It's the key words like Elohim, Elohai, and so on, different major words. uh, look up what is defined as sin in the biblical text, and you'll find that it is defined as one who does not keep the laws of the Old Testament.
Yeah, that's basically what I've sort of discovered through my research. Just it seems like you have to just stick to the basics, and a lot of it sort of makes everything a little, it makes it
You
confusing.
see, you see, one of the laws that they told us, keep in mind, they said, oh, you only have to keep the 10 laws. No, that's not what it says at all. He was telling us not to obey the man-made add-on laws
Exactly.
that the Pharisees were adding on, and any other religion was adding on, and retain what was originally given to us. And like right now, Canada and Germany are passing laws that makes having sex with animals legal.
Yeah, it's
Well,
messed up.
that's one of the laws outside of the 10 commandments that says you shall not have sex with animals. Okay? Why would we do away with that?
That's sort of crazy.
Right now, according to Christianity and what they're taught, they should not reject that it's okay to have sex with animals, because that's the laws that he told that they don't have to follow. In the Old Testament, that doesn't make sense for moral, righteous character, because the laws he told us to follow builds morally righteous character. And that's what sin is when you're not morally right, when you're not following the guidelines he's given us. You cannot be morally right, therefore you're a sin. Sin is, being void or contrary to what he's saying as far as laws go. And man's laws are superseding his laws of common sense and righteousness.
I think a
So
lot of people this day and age, the world's a lot less innocent, and it's more self-centered and full of ego, and it's definitely interesting times that we live in. Everyone feels it in the air. It's not as
well, he
nice as the old days, and I'm I'm still young, but it's still
he
things aren't
said
as innocent as they were 2 decades ago.
he said all of this would be fulfilled before the generations that saw Israel form shall die out. Before that generation dies out, all will be fulfilled. We're coming. We're in the end days, and we are in tribulation. We're just not in the great tribulation yet, because we're in Jacob's trouble. Jacob's trouble started in 2001 when Esau declared war against Jacob, Jews and Christians. Okay, and this is equivalent to the same time as the trouble of Jacob when you read his story. He worked 7 years before he was tricked by a bride he knew nothing about. Well, we're the bride and the bridemaid waiting for a groom, in theory. So in 208, we received a world leader we knew nothing about, and he was from the Esau branch. Esau sworn to destroy Jews and Christians. Islam. So we have to wait another 7 years, and then whenever every 50th year there's a jubilee. Well, this time there happened to be, so we got to wait one extra year, and that jubilee would be finished around March or April. I believe it'll be March. I believe the seasons are going to come a little bit earlier than normal because of this, the weather pattern changes.
So you think
And
it'll be warmer
March.
in March?
Well, I think the barley will come up earlier, hopefully, because we have an astronomical event where Jupiter is in the belly of the woman, as it says in Revelation 12:1, and 12:1 to 12:3 or 4 or whatever. It says that she'll have a crown of 12 stars, which is the Mezorah, the zodiac signs, as her crown. She'll be pregnant. Well, the king planet, which is Jupiter, is in her belly, in her womb. And when you delay the Earth's rotation by 12 hours, like it says in Joshua's long day, and delay the moon, which is what I did not get correct in 2016. You have to delay the moon by 12 hours. It places the moon exactly at the foot of Virgo once you have those two delays in there.
And that's for 2017, you're saying, right?
Yes,
March or
15th,
April.
15th and 16th of 2000. And we won't know if this is the date until we observe it. We have to be watchers and we have to be observant. He said he would show us a sign. Okay, so, and he says what the sign is. Now, this is not the so-called rapture. People get these things mixed up.
Mm-hmm.
There's two taking away. One of them is a rapture where you go to heaven. And that's at the end of the 3.5 years. Remember where the dead are first?
Mm-hmm.
And the two prophets are there. They're dead. They're dying. They're dead, laying in the streets.
Yes.
Then the dead are risen first to go to heaven. Then the living. Well, how many days do the two prophets prophesy? They prophesy for 1,260 days, 3.5 years. That brings you back up to March, where Elijah shows up for the Feast of Passover. And he is the announcer that the groom is coming. Not the same night, because that's not the way it was done in the old days. He would announce it at the beginning of a week, and the groom would come mid of week, mid of night, 3.5 days later. Yeshua is coming back on the same night that he was resurrected when he last came. In other words, a lot of people say, "Oh, the first half of the feasts are all been fulfilled and Passover is fulfilled." No, only half of it's been fulfilled. Elijah comes back and announces the groom comes. Out of a lot of people would draw a menorah with seven candlesticks, and they'll mark off 4 of them are filled. Fulfilled. I say it's 3.5, and we still got 3.5 to fulfill. Elijah comes back on the Feast of Passover at night, announcing the groom is coming. 3.5 days later, which happens to be the day of the crossing of this planet. And that's when he brings a remnant. That's a scary word. Only a partial. Into the wilderness where they're protected for 3.5 years. Remember, 3.5 years later, the dead are first, then the living. So that's when all believers are off earth 3.5 years later.
Mm-hmm.
And people mix this up. They try to combine, but they don't understand the Hebrew wedding. The bride does not go straight into a wedding. She has to go in a place to prepare herself before a wedding. This is not a Western wedding. This is a Hebrew wedding. Different culture.
Yeah.
So unless we get a clearer viewpoint, understanding the Hebrew, you will miss what the Hebrews are saying in this Hebrew book. Just that clear.
Understandable. Now, with it being March and April, so if it's not next year, is it going to be like it's possible it could be any year after that?
I gave a I gave a number to all the way to beyond 2021, but reality, mathematically, it doesn't line up like that. For instance, Jupiter has an orbit of 11.8 years. And it's known that either the Messiah will come back on a Sabbath year or a Jubilee year, one of the two. If you know anything about math, 11.8 years sequence, I can't make it match for another Sabbath or Jubilee for the next century. Well, that means this generation that saw Israel formed will be dead.
Mm-hmm.
Now, remember, I can't predict the future. I want to make this clear. But I'm just saying, if it's not this March, I don't have an answer. As far as the signs in the sky that he's describing,
mm-hmm.
it doesn't occur again. So I'm just saying, it's clear that he's given us a sign in it. Remember, he's mentioning the moon.
And Gill, and that's in that when you say you don't have an answer if it doesn't happen in March and April, that's the part of you that I really respect, because that's sort of how I feel when I'm researching. It's like there's so much to it. I don't have a true answer, and I'm not going to say as a matter of fact or write anything in stone. It's like I don't think anyone knows, and you're the only person that's really, you know, been humble enough to say, listen, I've put this research together. This is my best guess, and that's all I can do. And there's a lot of criticism you've gotten for it, but I try to correct people and say that you are humble and you reach out to people. You talk to anyone who you know.
Of course, yeah, anyone.
You're very interactive with people who follow you on Facebook and stuff. So I definitely have a big respect for you, you know, and your work.
See, people are looking for absolutes. Only the Father himself can give absolutes. I can't.
Exactly.
I can only be attentive and watch and try to understand, just like Daniel. Remember, Daniel studied the stars. And at one point, he had to ask, what does this all mean? And he was told, he said, this will be shut up to the end of time. Mm-hmm. But what he gave Daniel was the first set of numbers, gave us the pattern when Yeshua came the first time. Then he gave him a second set of numbers that gives us the pattern on when he will come the second time. Well, he said at Mount Sinai, the Father said, when you enter the land of Canaan, that is your first Jubilee. And there's a word that's still a mystery there, which is Shabuim in Hebrew. He says there will be 70 Shabuim before the Messiah comes again. Well, I believe that was actually meant Jubilees. Well, because of the Nibiru disk using astronomy, we can actually pinpoint the year they went into Canaan. And that date is, and this Jubilee that we're in right now is 70 Jubilees. Mathematically, if they could, anybody that could predict this stuff and give us a pattern. Remember, the constellation shifts over every 2,100 years. Okay, every 2,000. In other words, 2,000 years ago, it was not Virgo for Passover. It was the scales, Libra, the scales of judgment or the scales of weighing a debt. That's what it meant, and that's part of the fulfillment that he did. And now what we have today is the woman fulfilling what was written in Revelation. Now, how did they know the constellations? The 12 constellation takes 26,000 years to orbit completely, 360 degrees. And that each constellation shifts over a month every 2,000 years. You see, the zodiac is off by a whole month now, because when it was created, it tells you when, because you can look at the signs in the thing. It was created over 2,000 years ago. It wasn't created 6,000 years ago. And that's why it's still off right now.
It's very interesting. I appreciate all the time you've, taken to speak with me. I have to wrap it up and go. I got to make some dinner and do stuff. I know you got stuff to do as well. So I just want to wrap it up. Like, when it comes to other people interested in this topic that are very novice like myself, or even amateur astronomers that want to dive into this, as complex as it is, when you're dealing with biblical things and how sort of coded everything is, like, what would you say for amateur astronomers? What would be your best advice to track this and keep our eyes to the skies to sort of find something?
It is in Noah's time, we had two events. That meant we had two meteor showers on Earth's planetary plane 5 months apart. The book of Revelation is describing the same thing. Two meteor showers 5 months apart. That means this object has to be on the ecliptic. That is a pencil-thin line across space, across the 12 signs of the Mesorot or Zodiac, whichever way you wish. Mm-hmm. But all the data from where they sent the Pioneer probes, the Chinese, Korean, and Japanese documents, the 14 events that are listed in the Bible, uh, white paper studies that pertaining that there's unknown gravity tugging in one area of space, two of them, two white paper study. All of these point to only out of 88 constellations, it points to only one constellation, Sagittarius, and not anywhere on Sagittarius, but on the ecliptic. That's where we need to look. And when they're going to allow us to see it, it'll look like a star. Even when it's 7 days away from Earth, it'll only be about half the size of the moon. Most of the time period is going to look like a star, maybe like a comet. Don't know for sure because no one living today's seen it. But sometimes it's described as a comet and sometimes it's described as a star. So we don't know exactly when the plasma will start reacting.
Interesting.
But, so this is where we look. We have too much hard data that points to that area. White paper reports. This is not fictional. This is hard data. We do have an object, and it is showing effects, and it is coming in. We just don't know when. We have to keep our attention in the skies.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I really appreciate your time. I know that you're very easy to reach with, questions, and I'm sure other people that, watch my channel probably have some questions. So I appreciate your work, and I like how humble and just, honest you are about just laying out the facts that you've researched and sort of, not being so in your face and a matter of fact about things like the world will end March. There's a big difference with some of these channels, and it really bothers me that I see how it affects people. And
I can only say with great infinite, it greatly concerns me. I cannot give absolutes. It's just that taking this trip to the biblical records gives me great concern for the last book of the Bible, because you won't understand the last book of the Bible unless you know the rest of the stories of the Bible, because the data to understand the last book is in these other stories, and that's what I'm pointing out. These are data points for you to understand the last book of the Bible, because we're going to have a combination of these effects in the past in this one event. The Bible makes it one extraordinary claim. It says the next time this planet passes by Earth, it's going to be the worst event in all of Earth's history. That means Noah's flood was not the worst. This next event is.
Yeah.
Now that is a extreme statement, and it makes it. So it gives me great concern for us to keep our eyes in the sky and look for it.
Excellent. So
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I just want to thank you again. And I think you've probably done interviews with all kinds of people, like probably way more knowledgeable than me. It really means a lot to me that you take time out for someone as novice as myself to just sort of discuss things and try to clarify things, because I'm just trying to, like everyone else, try to put the pieces of the puzzle together to see, because I feel like something's off. And I struggle to point my finger, to exactly what's going on. And I'm so happy that you took the time, because I do respect, your work. And I know you get a lot of criticism, so,
I understand the skepticism. I was a hardened skeptic. But the data, I no longer have a footing to be a skeptic anymore. The data is overwhelming. So, and I don't mind sharing it with other people. It's just that they have to have an ear to hear and an open mind to review the data and with an open viewpoint, and they can make up their own mind. Is it real or is it not?
Excellent.
But I believe it's a valid, extremely valid object. It's the most talked about object in the Bible and the least known.
Yeah, and everyone's fascinated with it. It seems it seems like, to me, it's growing in popularity by the day. The attention that it gets, and people talk about psyops and all that, like how they put stuff in movies and commercials and all kinds of end times kind of things to sort of condition people to the thought of it. So it makes you wonder. So, and I've had some undeniable things that it's hard for me to shake, to let go of, just saying, brush it off like it's nothing, because I feel there's something, and I'm still open to trying to figure it out. So,
We have real effects on Earth, and we have real effects inside our solar system. This object is not light years away. It would not be showing up with this levels of effect, with these extreme numbers that we're seeing on Earth. It's closer than that. And these are real effects. Now, if people want to ignore the real effects, well, that's to their own peril. And it's no longer my responsibility, actually. The only thing I'm doing is bring the facts, let the people make up their own choice, and then walk away.
exactly.
I'm not here to carry their, to hold their hand and try to shove it down their throat. That's not my position. Anybody that has reasoning and knows how to do the numbers can reproduce my own the same findings. I tell them where to get the evidence and what to look for.
I'm going to go ahead and get off. I just hope you have a great night, and thank you very much, Gil.
You're welcome.
All right.
Thank you.
God bless. Bye.
Okay. Bye bye.
Hi, everybody. This is Steve Olson, WSO. It's August 15th, and I'm sitting here with Gill Broussard. Hello, Gill.
Howdy, Steve. How's it going?
It's going great, man. And Gil's going to be one of our speakers at the WSO Live Conference on August 25th and 26th. Gil will be speaking on the 26th. But anyway, Gill, you and I have been bouncing around this concept of the Foucault pendulum. And it's important for us to understand things like the Foucault pendulum so that we can monitor things that are happening on the Earth, right?
Right. There's a definite effect that takes place during a full eclipse to the Earth here.
And why don't you tell us, first of all, how does a Foucault pendulum work and what does it prove?
Well, the Foucault pendulum was created by a French physicist to study the rotation of the Earth. The pendulum is constant. It just swings back and forth. And the ground underneath it is what rotates. Okay?
Yep.
And in some of these, you see these pendulums sometime in museums or observatories. There's a few. There's one in California, the Graham. You see observatory?
You know, in fact, Paris has a famous one in Paris, I think, too.
Well, that's the one that he had created.
Oh, so the one in Paris is actually the one that Dr. Foucault actually built. Awesome. Cool.
Well, he was in Paris whenever he was doing these experiments. He built a few of these because it got quite popular. Some of these will have these little pins set up where it's timed, you know, that whenever the Earth rotates, that it'll knock down the pins with X amount of timing in between. It's the pins. Well, this other physicist, Maurice Alice, discovered that there's during an eclipse that this process is interrupted, that there's a delay that takes place between the time of the eclipse and the next pin that drops. And sometimes it would miss it, actually.
Wow. So just a lunar eclipse, or sorry, a solar eclipse would do that. Just a regular one between the moon and the sun.
Right. Now, wow. The astronomers don't want to touch this in a way because they can't explain it, because it cannot be explained by gravity. And the physicists have a better chance of explaining this. And what I'm going to point out is, this is my theory, and I'm pretty sure it will be proven out. This is what I would call a mini or micro version of Joshua's long day. What this does, it interrupts the solar winds enough to where it interferes with the solar winds hitting the Earth, which is what causes our spin, because it interacts with the magnetic field of Earth, and basically it causes us to spin, causes our core to spin.
If we go to the solar wind as a factor variable in the spin of the Earth, and we have a very slight slowdown when we have an eclipse with the moon, what you're claiming is that if we had a larger object, say a planet 7X, as you claim, that would cause even a longer delay or longer slowdown in the spin, if you will.
Yes, because we're in the plasma tail a much longer period of time.
Gotcha. So it's almost like we're suspended without anything driving our rotation.
Correct. It's just like a dimmer switch on a light. You're reducing the power less and less to where Earth finally comes to a complete stop for a short period of time.
Interesting.
And you end up with a 12-hour delay in Earth's rotation. This will happen again, it's mentioned in the book of Revelation. But the way that it's mentioned, it says that I will turn the day into night and night into day. And it's also listed in the Old Testament.
Now, guys, if you are familiar with Gill Broussard, Gill is an expert, and one of the things he's done, and you need to go look at his work if you haven't looked at it, especially if you're interested in the scriptures, is that he's linked these unusual celestial events like Joshua's long day in the book of Joshua. I think it's in the book of Joshua, right?
Yes.
Go ahead, Gill. This is a Bible story. Why don't you go ahead and tell us what happened on Joshua's long day?
Yes, in Joshua 10:11, you can read about it. I have it on the charts, or you can download the book for free. You can go to planet7x.net. At the bottom, there's a link that brings you to a Google Drive, and you can download these graphics that show and explains and shows you where these stories in the Bible, these comments in the Bible are describing real events.
By the way, guys, Gill Broussard has always given away all of his hard-won research. And Gill, thank you for doing that.
Well, you're welcome. I'm just trying to reach as many people as I can to show to them that these are factual events. These are not made up stories, because they didn't have the level of knowledge of orbital mechanics to be able to fake 14 events in different characteristics, but it meets the same model that we can build today in software. We have a real object that has come through the universe 14 times in the biblical records and another 5 times in secular. It was documented by the ancient Chinese in 1054. That's only about 960 years ago. And they saw an object for a total of 26 months. They didn't have a telescope yet. So they had 13 months visual coming in, 13 months leaving. You might see a comet maybe for 2 months, maybe 2.5 at the most. To see even a comet-like object for 13 months, that's a huge planet-sized object. And we can build a model to that, because we know the limit. We know that at 6 magnitude, that's when the eye can see something in space, around 6. So we put 6, and then we allow the model to come in. And that tells us that this object is somewhere between 5 to 7 times the diameter of Earth, roughly. If it's a normal planet of any type, not knowing how bright it is, its reflective properties.
Yeah, and I'm not sure anybody claims they know exactly what its composition is, do they?
No, the magnetic pull, the gravity, the density, those are all unknown factors. See, the word fiery in ancient terms could mean illuminated, like bright, or it could be actually literal fire. And that's where a lot of the misinterpretation describes this as a sun. If this would have been a sun or a mini solar system, the mini solar system would have a different total path coming in each time, basically, because it's orbiting the second sun. And that's not what we see in the data. We see a constant elliptical orbit, just like you would a comet or an asteroid. Okay. Mm-hmm. So this is a single planet. It may have moons around it or some object like that, but basically this is a single object, and it's not fiery. It's illuminated. It means it, just like all of our plants have some sort of properties
in this
reflect light.
Yeah, when we see Venus really bright in the morning now, for example,
exactly,
right before the rising of the sun, we might say that Venus is fiery right now.
Correct.
So hey, you were showing me an example of, so this is an example of how this lines up with Joshua's long day, but you were showing me that there was another biblical account that got further validation with a finding from Nineveh, the story of Jonah and Nineveh, that story. Could you tell us more about that, Gil?
There's a clay tablet that was found somewhere in the 1800s, I believe it was. And it was found in Nineveh in the library of a king of the time period around 700 BC. Now, it's at the British Museum today. And once I did my research and I knew the time periods that I was looking for, that's when I just recently started looking for artifacts, because I knew the astronomy, the emperors, the kings, so on, they all had most of them had astronomers, because the reason why they needed these astronomers was to warn them ahead of time of this approaching planet, so they could store food, just like they do today. The elite want to know when to store food. Well, there's this disc. It's called the sky disc, I guess you could call it, from Nineveh. And when I took a look at it, I was able to determine Pisces, and I was able to determine Gemini. So the other constellations were right in order, just like, they're in order in the sky. And what's interesting is the bottom right, where it shows the sun. It shows the sun right here as being the largest object. Then the moon is second. Then Mars, Mercury, and Saturn.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when we turn to the time frame, which is 687 right here, and go 40 days earlier, we get the same exact lineup as this disc shows. You can see that there's a comet-like object right in here,
Mm-hmm.
with a line drawn through it that goes right through the center of the sun. Well, that's the ecliptic. You see this gray line right here? This is called the ecliptic.
Yep.
Well, for us to have a meteor shower twice, it has to be on the ecliptic, as Revelation talks about. Well, and all of these planets are in the bottom corner, as is shown right here. You can see this upper view. We're looking over the north, looking down from the north onto our solar system. And you can see where it's right next to the, let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. You can see where it would give you the 40-day warning right here. This is the 40-day warning. Earth is right here. The comet or planet-like object is right here, which is exactly 40 days. Well, this is exactly the warning of Nineveh, of Jonah. This tablet was drawn by the king's astronomers to document the event of Jonah.
That might explain where they were so ready to repent too.
Exactly. Jonah didn't create one miracle.
No, in fact, Jonah ran away. He didn't want to do it. He thought that the Ninevites were too evil to go preach the gospel to. And so, and so the Lord, that's where the whole, he went into the belly of a whale and all that story comes from. But then ultimately Jonah did go to Nineveh, and what happened was Nineveh repented.
Correct. If you were to go to a town and say, repent today, with about 20,000, or the numbers go from 20,000 to 200,000 from Nineveh, without creating one miracle, why would they believe you? Would it be because they didn't have the internet or TV or radio, that they were in tune with nature, and that they could tell that their crops were dying, fish kills probably, they felt the earth shaking,
crops failing,
weather, it's extreme weather. And then the only thing that Jonah had to do was point to the sky, because it's rounding the sun now, and he can show it to him. It says, in 40 days your dooms comes, which is documented in this disc right here.
Right. I think that the royal astronomers of Nineveh probably looked at the king and said, "The guy's not lying, bro."
Exactly.
But I always wondered, when I was in Bible school, we were studying this in Old Testament survey, and I always why would Nineveh, just this hardcore evil, that's what they were said to be. that they were very dark-hearted, they were very cruel in their war fighting. I mean, they were very arrogant, et cetera, et cetera. I always asked the Lord, I said, why would they repent? And this is the first time I've ever heard an answer to that, because there was no reasonable reason for them. Why? Because some guy walks in on a donkey, Jonah? Really? I don't think so. This is an empire you're talking to. That'd be like Gill Broussard and I walking up into Washington and expecting to get an audience with President Trump for him to listen to our plea, right? It wouldn't happen unless there was some reason for it to happen, right, Gill?
Correct. And so, and why would they draw this object like a comet on the ecliptic, which they knew what the ecliptic was, obviously, and document such a significant event? Why would they? If it was just a normal comet, they wouldn't have documented it. There was something seriously going on. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
And we have multiple cultures that are doing that. We even have other ones.
Hey, didn't you have an example of Egypt doing a similar sky disk as well? Or am I rushing you, Gill? I don't mean to rush you.
No, that's fine. Let's see here. Yeah, here's the Egyptian disc. Well, not disc, but a ceiling. It's a sculpture on a ceiling on the Temple Hathor. Some French archaeologists went over there and they cut it out, I think around the turn of the century. They cut the ceiling out and they put a fake one up, and they took the real one and shipped it to the Louvre.
Oh, those dirty French.
Yeah, well, there's a dispute whether or not they were given permission to do that or not. They say they did. So anyway, it is what it is, I say.
But in your model, this would be the next flyby, right, Gill? So fast forward from from Jonah's Nineveh experience to Job's trouble. This would be the next flyby.
Let's check the timeline real quick.
Yep, Job's troubles.
Yeah, here is Job's trouble. The next one would be David. Okay. Oh yeah, correct. It's Job is next. This is it.
Yep. And so this lines up with an observation, just so everybody's clear on what you're showing us. This is an Egyptian ceiling relief that was in a temple, ancient temple in Egypt, showing basically what Gill's purporting is showing another pass of the Planet 7X system. Gill?
Right. This is the east and west. This is basically, you see this line across, this is the horizon, okay? They obviously had the math on the orbits of the planets because they show even the planets that are out of their sight on the opposite side of Earth, because they know that it has an X amount of days before it comes back. Well, all of these green little objects with the staffs in their hand are the planets. You have all of them shown here. You got Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, and Venus. The red object right here is their zodiac. Then we have the sun on this side, and we have the moon that's over here to the left. Then you have this object called Horus that's rising. Okay?
Yep.
If you go to here, this is exactly what you see. You see the moon on this side, you see the sun on this side, you see the planet rising, coming up. You see all the other planets that they're talking about. And this is just a little bit sooner than 40 days right here. If you look at the top right corner, 40 days is about, maybe right here somewhere. So it's a little bit sooner. Earth is right here. So in other words, this comet is going to pass before Earth reaches the same month. It's going to be a little bit ahead of it. But Earth is going to travel through the debris field right here. which is what happened to Jonah. Now, the astronomy gives us a date of 1354. I mean, the software. But you have compensate, which the software does not do any compensation from the time of Hezekiah at 700 BC. The calendar year was only 360-day year. So you have to subtract 5¼ days for every year that's greater in time than Hezekiah. So that would end up giving you about 10 years you have to subtract from the software, giving you the year 1342, which is what the biblical year is, 1342 of Job's trouble. When you follow the lineage.
So you're saying, Gill, let me see if I can pull something else up that's interesting, is you're saying that when we see planet X on the horizon to the left of the sun, not on the horizon, but to the left of the sun, then it's a 40-day warning to passing through its debris trail. Is that what you're saying?
It depends on, remember, it depends on the position on where Earth is at the time. Let me show you.
Yeah, it could be different.
Okay.
Different, right?
The Earth is a little bit further behind than it was prior to, and this is a little bit ahead. Remember, it was right here, so this was the 40-day warning, and Earth was closer to this point. But now the planet is ahead of it, so it's going to pass ahead of it before Earth ever. So it's not a close. In other words, the Earth didn't tilt because it wasn't a close passing to Earth. But Earth does go through the meteor shower, which is what happened to Jonah right here. Job, I meant. It says that his flock and his shepherds were totally consumed. There was no bodies. His shepherds and all of his flocks were totally consumed. And then the pressure wave knocked down a building or a home that his sons and daughters were celebrating in, which is probably Passover. They were getting ready for whatever. And they were totally killed. They were killed. That's Job's trouble. If you go read the details, it tells you this. And so this is a March, April event. Always. Always.
Yeah.
Now, Passover is a moving day because it's associated when the crop is right, you know, to start a Hebrew calendar year.
Right.
And so, and then there's a progressive thing. You have to add a 13th month every 2 to 3 years to bring it back into the cycle, the proper time of the crops being ripe. So it's a moving target. But this planet has a set track. It always crosses a given point. Where Earth is could be months earlier or months later.
Right. In its orbit.
But it always has that point in space that it crosses. Kind of like a train with a track. We know the track is laid down. We know the general time frame. Because of these artifacts, I've gotten it within 3 to 4 days of its normal path now. Used to be about a month. Now I've narrowed it down to, let's say, within a week. Okay? It will happen again. And the Bible talks about it being this next time it comes, it says in Revelation, is the worst time in all of Earth's history.
And that would just be because the Earth is closer to in this theory, the Earth is closer to this passing than it ever has been. And that's why we're going to get more effects than we've ever seen before, is what you're saying.
There's a series of things. We never had a electronically sensitive civilization.
I'll call it technology dependent civilization.
Correct.
Right?
But electronically, it's dependent. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
The electronics are going to be severely affected by the plasma and many of the circumstances that this thing going to cause. The Bible in in the book of Revelation where he sends the 4 angels to stop the winds. Well, what causes the winds? It's the rotation of the earth.
Yeah, and if you're going to stop the winds, you'd stop the earth. If you were talking.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then in the Old Testament, during the end days, he says, I will make the day into night, night into day. That's a 12-hour delay. An eclipse does not give you daylight during a nighttime event, you know. So he says, I'll make day into night, night into day. That's like saying I'll make midnight into noon and noon into midnight. So you're looking at a 12-hour delay, looking at Earth stopping, and if it passes close enough, Earth will tilt 26 to 28 degrees, like it has 3 to 4 times in the past. It's mentioned in.
Well, that's where Joseph would have gotten the whole universe bowing to him, right?
Correct. Another artifact, which we'll show you right now.
And again, guys, if you're not familiar with these Bible verses and things like that, that's okay. We're talking about Old Testament stories, and one of the story I just referred to is the story of Joseph. Long story short, it was very, very in line with what Gill is saying in terms of the sequence of events, the droughts that happened around that time, and then Joseph's ultimately he was in power there, and he actually had literally, as promised by the Lord earlier in his life, the whole universe bowed to him. Go ahead, Bill.
Right. At age 17, he had a dream that the sun, moon, and stars would bow to him. Okay. Well, I have a problem with that astronomically. Okay. As far as the sun bowing to him, if he can see the stars, you can't see the stars at night unless it's an eclipse and that type of thing. Well, the Nineveh disc, not the Nineveh, the
Nibiru.
The Nibiru sky disc made in Germany actually gives us the date that lines up with Joseph. When you compensate, remember, like I said, anything past Hezekiah, you have to subtract from 360, 365 and a quarter. You have to subtract 5 and a quarter days for every year that goes further back in time from Hezekiah.
Right.
Well, that's 16
because
years.
Our orbit changed, guys. That's what Gill's saying. Our orbit changed, and the length of time it took for us to make a revolution around the sun changed. So you have to add that 5 and a quarter days.
Correct. It came so close to Earth at one point where during Hezekiah's time, Earth's orbit around the sun is slightly larger because it drug us slightly outward. And now that's when all calendars globally, not just the Hebrew calendar, but globally, within the next 5 years had to change to a 365 and quarter day year. The reason why it took them 3 to 4 years before some of these people change, because after 3 to 4 years with a 5-day change, you're 1 month off on your seasons now. They have to change.
Right, and that was critical back then, everybody, because that's when they planted their crops.
Right. So
they tracked the stuff so they knew when to plant their food and everything. Go ahead, Gil, sorry.
So this disc right here was created in Germany at that latitude. Well, with Capricorn and Gemini, that tells you that it's the month of April. And you cannot see the constellation Orion from that latitude unless Earth tilted 26 to 28 degrees.
There you go.
And Joseph was 40, and that was mid of the drought. Because this thing brings 3.5 year drought coming in, 3.5 year drought as it leaves. Remember in Revelation, it says when the 2 prophets show up, they bring 3.5 year drought. The 2 prophets show up on the arrival of this planet because what's left is 3.5 year of drought. And this was mid of the 7-year drought for Joseph, and it gives us the exact date that this occurred. Now, keep in mind, I just clearly showed you a German artifact, a Egyptian artifact, and I also showed a
Egyptian,
Sumerian,
right? Sumerian, Egyptian,
artifact.
Yep.
None of these were in cahoots with the Hebrews on trying to make the Bible real. The Torah real. because they were documenting a real object that affected them. But the Hebrew stories of the also confirms the same object, but even better detail.
That's just amazing. All right. Well, Gill is going to be a speaker with us on the 26th of August up in Minneapolis. You guys can come and see Gill. Gill's going to do a full presentation. And you know, Gill, we let you share what you want to share, and then at the end of that, we're going to actually have a Q&A session with Gill too. So you want to make sure and see if you can participate in all that. But Gill, I appreciate you coming on and talking about the two things. People can actually build their own macabre pendulum, by the way, or you can buy one online. If you want to just always know how well the Earth is rotating, get one. And then we'll have Gill with us next week, and we can't wait to have you, Gill. Did you have any final words you want to share with everybody before we let you go for today?
No, everything's fine. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to that conference since I talked to you earlier about it, and I got some people helping me on some of the expenses.
By the way, we're all kind of scraping together and getting everybody there, you know, nickel and diming. David Dobbs has also had a person that funded his trip to the United States. So he'll be there with us live. Gill will be there with us live now. And those are two people we didn't know we'd have live. So I wanted to thank all you folks that are helping these guys get here, because I think this is an important conference. And Gill is one of the very important voices in this community. We have to listen to Gill. Gill, any other thoughts?
If anybody wants that free book, just go to planet7x.net, go to the bottom, and there's a Google Drive, and you can download the charts and the book and all of these things for free.
Right on. All right, thanks, Gill. And go ahead and make sure you go download those materials, check them out, and Gill, we'll see you in a week.